Right, good afternoon and welcome to Infrastructure Question Time. And this year we're in Leeds. Welcome to you, our audience, and those of you in the live web stream from wherever you might be. So this is your chance to participate. This is the audience participation part of the conference. So I'm hoping that we can get some good comments and questions from the floor. And also via Twitter as well. So if any tweets come through, I've got a runner who's going to let me know. So I'm conscious that you have already been introduced to some members of our panel, some of whom have spoken already, but I will introduce them all. So starting nearest me, we have Nikki Cooper. Nikki is Assistant Director at IT Services at the University of Wolverhampton. According to her university profile page, she is passionate about people, likes horses, retail therapy and food. Welcome, Nikki.
Not necessarily in that order.
David Cotty, who you heard speak this afternoon, to remind you, is Director of Cloud Platform Technologies at Oracle. When I Googled David, the words expert and cloud kept popping up, so I'm hoping that we can learn from his wisdom this afternoon. Tony Weir is Director of Infrastructure at the University of Edinburgh. A Glaswegian, he's a passionate supporter of Celtic. I'm not sure what that will bring to us this afternoon, but we'll see. And last but by no means least, Arthur Clune, Assistant Director of Infrastructure at the University of York, going by the Twitter name of Fat Rat, and a self-confessed geek, and with over 8,000 tweets, I'm hoping he'll be able to give us some insight and comment this afternoon. So please give a round of applause to our panel. So we've got about an hour this afternoon, so we're going to go straight in. What I will say, though, please, is can you wait for the roving mic if you want to speak? That's not only so that the panel can hear you, but it's if anybody's watching the live stream, they can hear you as well. So our first question this afternoon comes from Lynn Newbit. Lynn from Loughborough, please.
A lot about software-defined today. Is it just the latest buzzword, so here today, gone tomorrow?
Ooh, good question. Just a buzzword? Is this the latest sort of catchphrase? Arthur, you've talked a little bit about putting this into practice. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So, yes, it's absolutely a buzzword. People are putting software-defined in front of every product they want to sell at the moment. That doesn't mean it's not important. And I think when the froth settles, we will see some fundamental changes. I think probably the main change is that software-defined is almost an enabling technology. It's an underlying technology as part of the move to more cloud, more agile, moving up the stack. And that over time we'll actually probably hear less about it, because not that it won't be there and it won't be important, but that it'll be more like the plumbing.
Okay. David, do you want to put the sort of vendor side to this? Is it a buzz phrase or?
Yeah, so I'm from Oracle, and I speak for vendors worldwide when we're guilty of putting the latest buzzwords in front of existing products and calling it something new, when it hasn't really changed. However, on a serious note, software-defined has a future for sure. If I look at the future state of our data centers, we talk about dark data centers. We talk about data centers with no people. Because they will be software-defined. And that's the future. And something I was talking about earlier, and I don't really mean that people have no value. What I mean is people have more value than doing some things that are running data centers, and we should release them to do those things. And so software-defined absolutely is here to stay. And the only question that I'm left with is the amount of time between now and when the dark data center actually is there.
Okay, so we're hearing about how we're going to automate things, and in fact the presentation we've just seen talked about sort of automating that self-diagnosis. Are we going to be automating everything in the data center environment? Tony, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, would we always automate everything? Well, we're still racking the servers. I guess that's unlikely to be automated. So I guess the experience I've had closer to this is kind of the exploratory stuff we've been doing using OpenStack for research. And you can see even within that the types of orchestration that's been built into it, the types of automation that we're building into those really early services show you a future where most of the administrative tasks that we're looking to do to run our infrastructures just now are then basically just baked into code. So you really start to see that point of infrastructure becoming a coding operation rather than something that's, to a certain extent, command line still based just now.
Okay. So what do you think? Is this the future? Are we going to be seeing software defined? Are we going to be automating our data centers? If so, how long? How long have we got? Comments? Stunned silence. Aha, perfect. Audience participation. We have a comment.
So I was giving a talk today with Tony about software-defined storage, and one of the things we did when we sat down to write it was I told Tony why what we were doing was software-defined storage, and he went, "Is that software-defined storage?" And we came to the point that we think, well, we could probably blag it in the room that yes, this is software-defined storage. And then we heard Scott getting up this morning talking about all the benefits that software-defined storage brings, and he was giving half of our presentation this morning. So we kind of accidentally tripped into, oh look, we're doing software-defined, and we didn't go into it thinking this is a buzzword we're buying into. It's just the kind of things that people are evolving into naturally anyway. People are looking at more automation of their configuration stacks. They're looking at how do I make just using my infrastructure much more slick and efficient, because to be honest I'm just bored of going in there and doing it by hand. So I think a lot of our software-defined journey is going to be people just doing it because it's just the kind of path people are going down without them thinking, yes, I'm doing software-defined now, and they'll just end up turning up and having a software-defined infrastructure without really setting out to say, I want to subscribe to this buzzword.
Okay, so we're kind of doing it anyway. This is evolving. Any more thoughts or comments before we move on to our next question?
I guess I should reply to Orlando since he works closely with me the whole time. We can have these chats anytime. But I think one of the things is it always feels like pioneering days for these types of automation just now. So I mean, a lot of what we've been looking at just now, certainly within Edinburgh, a little bit away from the work that we've been doing within research infrastructures, has really been based upon the automation that our DevOps processes have started to bring forward. And it does feel like we're not making it up as we go along, but there's a lot of new thought going into that just now, that we are having the ideas. And I think the future probably is more about productizing that stuff. So it's less about as really innovative engineers, we figure out how to do this thing, and more looking to see, well, is there product that can just deliver that for us? I mean, there was a comment earlier, I think it was from Arthur, about OpenStack being, it wasn't a bag of spanners, but I can't remember what it was, a bag of bits, there it was. And that's absolutely true. All the work we've done with OpenStack just now, there's a lot of engineering. You've got to self-tool it. And there's a lot of change within it just now. You're absolutely right that you can be tracking a theme and it goes away. I would expect all that stuff to become firmer. If you look 5 years hence, I think that's all going to be productized.
Okay, so 5 years hence. I mean, this actually segues quite nicely into our second question this afternoon, which comes from Ian Russell from Edinburgh Napier. Ian.
Hi. So with the software-defined expression and such, and we've heard about a bit of automation going on, should university staff be worried about their jobs being replaced by software?
Nikki, what do you think?
I think that people's gut reaction probably would be, if the software is going to be doing all that, what am I going to do? But I don't think it's about people losing their jobs. It's about the roles that they do changing and the skills profile changing. And that can be quite scary too. I mean, change generally is quite scary. But I think a lot of it is about the way that that's talked about, the way that it's communicated. Actually, when I was listening to Colin, the speaker before, I'm not a technical person. I need to sort of nail my colours to the flag. I'm not at all technical. And I've been kind of hearing these terms being bandied around, this software-defined stuff, and thinking, well, I just don't get this. I don't understand what it is. But actually, for the first time, I had a real light bulb moment when Colin was talking, because I thought, actually, I'm starting to understand what this is. And so I think it's about the way that you actually describe it to people, and I think it's, and certainly when you're talking to the business as well, you can't go around talking about software defined this, software defined that. Doesn't mean anything. You've got to talk about it in terms of the benefits that it will bring, and you've got to do that with the staff too. What benefits will it bring? It'll stop you having to do this nitty-gritty stuff. It'll stop you having to be on call at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it will let you focus on something more important, more rewarding, more challenging.
Okay. Show of hands from the audience. How many of you have got too much to do in your daily job? How many of you, keep your hands up, how many of you would, welcome a little less to do through automation? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the answer in a sense. I mean, Arthur, you've been doing this practically.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take a slightly different view, which is that there are people that should be afraid for their jobs. We're coming off the back of a long period of stability in IT, going back to sort of the Windows XP, Windows 2000 sort of time frame, where actually we've had mostly Windows on the desktop, less so in universities than elsewhere, but there's been one client operating system. You've put servers in data centres, we've run our own mail servers, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. It's evolved over time. We've run our campus networks in basically the same way for about 10 to 15 years, depending on how you want to argue that. And there's a whole bunch of people that have a set of skills that maybe they've kept up to date in a narrow sense, but not in a broad sense. And some of them will make that change, and some of them won't. And I think the people that won't make that change are going to find life quite hard.
Comments? We have one at the back, two at the back there, please. Matt?
Thanks. I absolutely agree with Arthur. I think we've got a whole bunch of, and I counted myself as one of them, probably only a few years back, who built an Exchange mail server and did all that, and all of a sudden someone came along and said, we're going to move to Office 365. And we went, no, you're not. Mine's much better. And a lot of those people have got really emotional attachments to the systems that they've set up and they've built and they've supported over the many years. So I think he's absolutely right. There'll be some people who find that really challenging, and they will probably, unfortunately, almost have to go by the wayside at some point. However that happens, through leaving or early retirement or something like that.
Well, I think we probably all take it as read now that email is just a commodity that somebody else can do better than we can.
I think you'd be surprised there are an awful lot of people within infrastructure teams who don't see that still. And we try and explain. I said the point about trying to explain, but you try and explain, but it's an emotional attachment, and we've got to get to the emotion of it and not just use the logic.
Okay, we had another comment towards the back there.
Is that working? It is now.
It is now.
Like many people in the room, I've been involved in IT for close to 2 decades. I'm sure a lot of you have been in it for a lot more than me. But every time there's a revolution of some type, people fear for their jobs. We saw it with commodity hardware. We saw it with DevOps. The DevOps revolution was going to revolutionise things, and loads of people were going to lose their jobs. We saw it with bring your own device. We see it every 2-3 years, something like that. And there are more and more people working in IT than ever before. So I don't think it's that much of a worry. But I think the point that Arthur made is that if you don't reskill, then yeah, your job probably is at risk.
Fair comment. We had another hand just there towards my right in the middle.
Hello?
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that software-defined is the right term to use.
It's more profile defined from what I can recognise. You apply the profile at a global level and that's pushed down by the software. It's software driven, not software defined. All that's happening really is that you're outsourcing your knowledge. So whereas you might have a NetApp professional who knows how to use NetApp and knows how to use NetApp APIs, he may not know how to use HP storage APIs, but your software will know how to use that API. All that's happening is the software is applying a profile that you've written, rather than it actually being defined by the software.
Okay, let's see what the panel think of that. David, do you want to pick that one up? Are we software defined or profile defined? Are we just outsourcing our knowledge?
So I think there's an element of truth to that. I mean, it's never going to get to the point where everything is software defined. There's going to have some element of interaction to build that profile, to define what is the business outcome we want to achieve. To be honest, slightly going back to the previous question, I'm a bit on the fence between the two answers. In terms of so how much are the people needed? I think there is a sense of obviously reskilling, and people are going to have to build these profiles. We hear a lot. API is such a common thing these days. The whole world's moving towards API-driven everything. We are actually. We believe that enabling APIs across all our stack is the right thing to do. So, I think, to cut a long story short, I think I'm agreeing with you. I think software-defined perhaps is the wrong term. It's perhaps software-controlled. It's software is doing what we're asking it to do. But whether that will evolve into something different, I don't know. I'm very reluctant ever to say what comes next. I've been caught before.
We've got a couple more comments from the floor here. Lady over there on my right.
So there's been some acknowledgement about the kind of relative immaturity for some of these pieces of software-defined kit. And we're talking about staff feeling like they need to reskill. Where do you think, or what do you think staff should be looking at? Where should we be steering them to help them reskill if we're not necessarily completely sure about what direction we're going to go in?
Who wants to take that one, Arthur?
So I think the best advice for any member of an infrastructure team is to look at the level and the stack above you. So networking guys should look at what the server guys are doing, server guys should look at what the developers are doing, and developers should start, if they're not already, and hopefully they are, talking to the business. And I think that's just generally the best advice that one can give at this point. So networking guys need to learn to program, systems level people need to learn to program better and understand web APIs and how you talk to them. And it's that movement up the stack, and maybe some of the stuff at the bottom will go away, maybe it won't, but there's certainly going to be more blurring between those boundaries.
Nikki, I don't know whether you want to come in here thinking a little even further up the stack towards the more user end. I mean, one comment, one thought I had from Colin's presentation just before was, the idea of this service desk doing these sort of quite complex activities, and I was thinking, my service desk doesn't do that. I mean, Nikki, do you see this sort of pushing up the stack, if you like?
Yeah, I think that's quite a good way of describing it, and I think that we quite often underestimate our service desks and what they're actually capable of doing. And I think with the right development, access to the right tools, they can do more. And if again, going back to the previous presentation, if you've got things that are sort of being triggered automatically, then that again frees them up to take some of the more technical but mundane things from the higher end team. So it does come right down to that level, I think. So I think that I don't disagree with Arthur's description of it, and I think that the service desk have got a bigger role to play. We don't give them enough credit for what they're capable of doing.
Okay, Tony?
Well, I agree, but I wonder to what extent you want to go beyond that and start the whole shift left thing of actually giving your end users the access to the tool. So where a few presentations have touched on the fact that you're looking at giving those provisioning tools to your end customers. So instead of your development team having to send you a ticket to ask you to press the button to create you a VM? Do you just make the interfaces available to your development team? And of course we're going to have servers for all. Of course they're going to kick up loads of them. But if that's the infrastructure they need to get their work done, to actually deliver the business value that we're looking for them to do, then great. So I think there is something about not stopping at the service desk and keeping it going. And ultimately these types of I mean, I see it all as automation. That's software defined. I think it's all just automation. And the more we can automate, the more you can build the intelligence into code to make it reproducible, which is one of the main things you get out of it, then all the better. And give that to the users.
I think if you're going to do that, then it's got to be absolutely painless to use. Because as soon as an end user hits an issue, they're just going to, I can't be bothered with this, I haven't got time to do this, it's not my job to do this. It's got to be really simple. And that's not because they're stupid, it's because they've got, it's not their job to do IT, it's their job to do other things. So yeah, you can shift further left, but it's got to be easy.
Okay, so hold that thought for a moment. I'm conscious we did have another comment from the floor. I don't know if you still want to come in there. No? Okay. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you this one, because I'm conscious we're sort of coming at this, I think, in a relatively nascent way. And I'm conscious that there are providers, Oracle being one, Amazon, Microsoft out there. Well, this is just bread and butter. They've done this. Provisioning VMs in Azure is literally click 1, 2, 3. Are we making a meal of this? Is HE really behind the curve?
So, I think Colin before made a good point about, he didn't mention the word cloud, because sometimes we think software-defined and cloud is exactly the same thing. It's not. But in terms of provisioning, are you making more of it? I think the world of in that sense of infrastructure as a service is becoming, well, if I follow my notorious leader, Mark Hurd, who is the president of Oracle, he predicts a big consolidation in that market. So it's going to come down to a few people that are left who can offer those services. And there will be, the ability just to instantly provision a cloud service. You're going to start asking slightly different questions, actually, not how easy is it or how hard is it. You're going to actually say, which one gives me the best performance? Which one is the most cost optimized? Which one is the most performance optimized? These are the sort of questions that are going to start coming. So anybody, I mean, I'm not a techie. I can go and provision an Amazon, server or Azure server or an Oracle server. Quite what I do after that, I don't know. But that's the point, right? So, again, we're going back to that question about people and where do your skills have to change? In many ways, they don't, because you're just doing it somewhere else. Cloud is a delivery mechanism towards achieving IT. It's not a different IT concept, really. It's just a vehicle to give you the same things you're already doing in many senses. So, sorry, that's a bit of a vague answer, probably, but it's all I got.
So perhaps the biggest value is time. I mean, I don't know about your teams, but when I say to my systems team, please can we have a new server to do X, Y, and Z, that can be quite protracted. There are all sorts of, I won't say barriers, but reasons why things take time, whereas perhaps in this sort of newer world, that's where we're getting the maximum value. It's efficiency, it's time to deployment, and it's using those skills where they really need to be used rather than sort of at the front end. Okay, Arthur, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm just going to... The idea that the cloud won't change what we do, I'm with you in that I don't want to try and foresee the future, because that's always going to go wrong. But the cloud is so young. AWS is 4 or 5 years old or something? 7. Okay, so it's still recent, and as enterprises, the big move is really just starting now. So if we take what we're doing now and just put it into Oracle's cloud or AWS or Azure or whoever, and take a load of machines running a load of legacy applications and port them all over, then yes, we're doing what we were doing before. But I don't think that's what we're going to end up doing. What I don't know is what we will end up doing, because that's the rapidly moving bit, the functions as a service, the databases that are completely abstracted. And clearly, most of our legacy applications will not move into that world. So our student record system, does that mean we'll need a new supplier for a student record system? Does that mean we'll need to integrate it with another way? Will that change our development patterns so that we're not spinning up VMs? We're just spinning up functions as a service to talk to their API, to poke it into another API, and that's all that happens. So we've reduced an entire stack of a virtual server, say a Java application server and a whole pile of Java code down to 20 lines of JavaScript that calls from one API, does something, writes it out to another API. I don't know, but I think it's possibly unwise to say that what we're doing now will just be taken and transplanted somewhere else. I don't see that happening.
Well, I know you've just said, Arthur, you don't want to try and foretell the future, but we're going to go into our next question, which might make you have to think about that. Our next question comes from Mike Donnelly from the University of York. Mike, please.
As the world appears to be moving towards public cloud, do universities need hardware anymore?
And what I'll do, just before you answer that question, because we've had one that's very similar that was handed in to the reception, which is that what will the on-premise data center look like in 10 years? So effectively, it's two sides of the same thing. Will we have on-premise infrastructure, hardware? What will it look like in 10 years? Who wants to go first? Tony?
I think we're going to continue to have on-premises infrastructure. That might be the desktop or some kind of display device. It might be your local networking, which is kind of hard to put out in the cloud, though there are some functions of that you can start to commoditize in that way. The data centers themselves, the contents of the data centers, well, honestly, I don't know. The place where I see a lot of grunt getting used, the places within universities I see a lot of bulk of IT is in research computing. And one of the questions there is to what extent you'll start to see this stuff move out to the cloud. I mean, there are still some barriers which aren't technological for using public cloud services just now. Some of those are accounting standards. So the University of Edinburgh just now is capital rich. We've got a big capital investment programme. And so it's an awful lot easier for me to buy kit than it is for me to use cloud-based infrastructure. Cloud-based infrastructure is a revenue cost. It's the same cost I would use to pay staff. It's a completely different budget I use to buy stuff. And so some of those hurdles are going to have to be addressed before we actually see maybe a greater acceleration of cloud-based infrastructure, and particularly within big research computing environments where you see, and it's basically, as far as I can see, a government flush of money, which every now and then come through the research councils and then is built within a capital asset. Those types of things are difficult to do whenever there's a revenue cost out in the cloud.
I mean, I think you make a very good point there, Tony. Just thinking back to this morning's opening keynote from Gartner and talking about sort of the benefits of doing this software-defined stuff, I think was the technical term. You know, he talked about benefit being a reduction in capex. But I think this is one area where perhaps the sector is different because we have these injections of capital funding to do things. You know, we are bidding for capital money. And I think that does, and certainly in my institution, I'm sure in many of yours, to try and shift into increased revenue is actually very difficult.
I think it actually needs some good conversations as well with the finance people, with procurement people, because they won't understand what this stuff is. You know, we're only just sort of starting to get our heads around it. So I think that's a good point that you make. It's so different from like you said, buying stuff. It's a very difficult concept to get across, that you're not buying something tangible, but you're buying something that's out there. And then straight away they start panicking about that because it's our data that's out there, and how are we going to see what we're getting for our money? So I think there's got to be a lot of time and work put in helping the decision makers or the purse holders understand what this actually is and why you might want to do it, why might it be a good thing to do.
Well, it goes back again to the benefits. What are you really getting out of this?
I think just picking up on the sort of OPEX versus CAPEX thing for a minute. I mean, it's very hard to make a CAPEX investment and then not attract more OPEX. Right? Because if I buy a new server and I buy more licenses, I'm therefore tying myself into more support and other costs associated with it. So they're not completely mutually exclusive things. Notwithstanding, I get the point that if you are CAPEX richer than you are OPEX richer, there might be different solutions. Forgive me, I wasn't here when Gartner spoke earlier, but did they mention bimodal IT? Did they talk about that?
There was a mention of mode 2, right?
Yeah. So I mean, coming back to the question about, is on-premise dead? Certainly not. Is our view in Oracle. We don't believe anybody is, literally anybody in any industry is going to switch off today and go to cloud tomorrow. This concept of bimodal IT that Gartner described is that your systems of record on-premise, you have a different speed to that. That's the marathon runner. That's about a long distance, and I want my systems of record safe, secure. I want to be able to hug that server if I want to. Whereas I've got a different mode, which is quick, agile, innovate, and that's where I use cloud. So this concept of bimodal IT, coined by Gartner, we think is a very credible one, a very real situation. And you come back to the point I made earlier. In Oracle, we believe that they ought to coexist. They're not two completely different things, that you ought to be able to move between the two. That's not completely unique to Oracle, so I'm not trying to just sell you Oracle stuff. But we think it's a pinnacle point that you absolutely need to be able to have that choice, deployment choice between the two.
Arthur?
So I totally agree that we're not just going to pack up and move to the public cloud tomorrow. It's just bimodal. So I was asked to keep my language suitable for BBC Daytime when I was here, and bimodal is one of my trigger words. It's basically rubbish. So if you're looking, let's take a system of record for a university, your student record system, okay? We have what is, in Gartner's, it's a legacy student record system. It's slow, it's clunky. We put change control on it, it's manually poked and everything else. We've got all that sort of stuff. Will we still be running that system on-premise in, let's say, 10 years' time? I would be incredibly surprised. As we're buying new systems, we're buying them entirely cloud-hosted. And okay, there is a funding issue around how we pay for them, but we put that to one side for a minute. Once you start putting systems of record out in the cloud, at that point, the concept of data gravity comes in. So my data is over here. So why would I process it over here? I'm not going to. I'm going to put my processing over there as well. And actually, to say that something as key as my student record system is slow is not what I want. That is my key business value. I want that to be fast. Now, I need the data to be reliable and solid, and absolutely, I don't want to break my database. And that's obviously Oracle's business value. It's a rock-solid database. But once I've outsourced the whole platform, I no longer care what database it runs on, and where I process it will be wherever the person that's running that system is. And you see this with things like the new VLE systems that are all cloud-hosted, video conferencing systems that are cloud-hosted, the new student record system providers that are coming in. It's just offered as a service. There is not an on-premise option. So as we refresh these business systems over relatively long timescales, because moving a student record system is not quick, there will be this inevitable move off-premise. And once you've done that, that frees you up to do a whole bunch of other things, because looking after the system itself is now somebody else's problem, and I'm just doing the fast stuff around it.
So, absolutely valid, and I would stress that Gartner didn't coin the concept of bimodal IT thinking specifically about universities. So, systems of record not necessarily meaning student record systems, but perhaps if you're a university hospital with medical records, perhaps if you have other such sensitive data, you may have the attitude that I still want to keep it on-premise. And I'm not saying that would never go into public cloud. It could do, and there's clouds out there, including ours, where we have HIPAA certifications, etc. But look, I mean, it's down to each individual to decide that speed and the mode. So, bimodal IT doesn't necessarily dictate that systems of record will never move off premise. It's just a different speed at which we will adopt change in those environments. So, I don't disagree with anything you said, Arthur.
Okay, I want to know what you think. I'm going to ask the audience. Are we going to be cloud by default, sort of as Arthur suggests? All services will be in the cloud. Is this sort of accidental architecture, I think was the phrase that came up earlier this afternoon. What does the future look like 10 years hence? So we've got one here.
Hello. Hi. Arthur mentioned this idea of the default software as a service for new services, and that we don't care where these things then go. In terms of all the integration of all those things potentially being in different providers across the globe, is software-defined networking, is its real value when it moves into the internet and we get the software-defined internet, so that we can control those integrations?
Good question. Who wants to take that one? Dave, are you going to?
Well, back to my point before about sort of API enabling everything. That's kind of the point that, you know, once you get, you know, if I say, for example, do my HR in Workday, I do my my accounting in Oracle e-Business Suite or Fusion in the cloud, I do my customer experience in Salesforce. I've now got 3 siloed clouds. And that's an issue, right? So I've regressed like 20 years. I never would have designed that on-premise. That would be ridiculous. But actually now having adopted different cloud scenarios, I'm stuck with this concept of having siloed application architecture. So it's up to vendors like Oracle and others out there to have a solution to that. And we do. The way that you would integrate that on-premise, you'd think about, well, do I want a SOA architecture? Do I want a service bus? Do I want to use other tools? Is it a simple messaging job? Whatever. Whatever the answer is, you ought to be able to now get that as a cloud service. And to Arthur's point before about gravity, the question is, well, if more and more of my data is in the cloud, then I probably ought to be thinking about an integration services in the cloud as well. It just makes sense. We do integration cloud services, one of the things we do. Other solutions are available.
and I mean, I'll ask for some more comments in a moment, but I suspect we already have lots of things in the cloud. I mean, my VLE is in the cloud. I still manage to integrate it with my student record system. I still manage to integrate it with my student portal, etc., etc. So, further comments. What does the future look like for us? I saw some more hands up earlier, I'm sure. One at the back.
Hi. At the moment, if I want to certify that my system is going to work, I can go to VMware's compatibility portal and I can check the hardware, the software, the version of VMware, everything I'm running, and I can guarantee that's going to work without any bugs. Do you foresee that in the future I'm going to be able to do that with different cloud providers? So if I wanted an Oracle database from Oracle's cloud, but I wanted to run a compute element on AWS and I want to run some of the web widgets on someone else, am I going to have an industry standard compatibility matrix I can go to guarantee it works?
Ooh, an industry standard model.
Well, that's how things like OpenStack came about, right? And we started building our cloud on OpenStack, and then we decided not, because it's a bag of bits. But there's other considerations there. If I decide, for example, I'll have my Oracle database as database cloud service, and I'll have my application running in AWS, you start to think about, well, that's a network latency issue. If my application has to talk from a Dublin data center to perhaps Oracle in Netherlands or wherever it might be, then, yes, of course, we might get to a point where everything's compatible, but we still can't defy the laws of physics. The other considerations have to come into force then. Sorry, did I answer the question? Sort of.
I'm just going to agree, actually, that yes, if you've got your database in one place and you're talking to it from somewhere else, that's just going to create you problems. But just to go back a step, the issue with having, your workforce over here, your CRM over here, and all the rest of it, that's no different to what most of us do now. There's a few universities that have gone the integrated Oracle route or the integrated SAP route and have one platform that basically does everything. But I think most of us integrate different systems from different providers. And the methods of integration might change, but beyond that, conceptually it's the same. The details will change and what's hard and what's easy will change. But it's still the same problem of data from provider A to converting it to data from provider B.
Okay, we have a comment here in the middle, please.
As we move from
on-premises systems like student record, HR, accounting, whatever you want to call it. How do you think we're going to sell to the business the idea that they should move away from their long-established vendors who seem to buy them lots of lunches and do all these good things?
Yeah.
So I honestly don't see that as an issue. I think if you look at most executive teams within businesses, and that includes universities, what they're looking for is value. And certainly just now we're on the journey to look at a lot of the business IT systems just now, and it absolutely is a cloud first. And in the same way that, you know, if you want to run an email system in the cloud, you don't buy an infrastructure or a platform, then try and spin up your own mail system. You buy it as software as a service. The go-to now is just buy this stuff as software as a service. And the integration between all those pieces is just what APIs those software as a service components actually make available. I mean, there is something around data movement and the fact that data has gravity that for universities that generate a lot of data have to think about. So if you're thinking of bioinformatics communities, if you're looking at microscopy, there is still something to think about the pipes that people use and how that will actually interface into using cloud services. And the fact that data has gravity does mean that data gets sticky. So if you think, well, I just see clouds as commodity infrastructure services that I can just move my data about. If you've got a couple of petabytes sitting in AWS just now, you try and move it about, it's not going to move very fast. So there is something, certainly in the near horizon, about those universities that are big data generators having to think about probably dealing with those problems on site.
Okay, we had a comment from somewhere around there, not anymore. Okay. Nikki, I want to bring you in because we're talking a lot about the how, the what, the sort of how do we do all of this stuff. But is this not about, what's the impact effectively to our users? Do they care?
Yes. It's about the why, it's not the what, and it's not the how. I think what matters to our user community is why, and how will it be better? What's the positive impact on them? So, and I think that's often the mistake that we make when we're talking in IT, isn't it? We talk about the what and the how, and we get into all the sort of technical detail, and actually they're not interested. They want to know how it's going to make things better. That's the bottom line. Is it going to cost less? Is it going to be faster? Is it going to be easier? They're not interested in the technical nitty-gritty, and we're kidding ourselves if we think they are. And if we start to get into the technical nitty-gritty, we're likely to turn them off and they just stop listening. So when we're sort of trying to sell the benefits of something, we do need to talk in terms of benefits. What will be better, or what will we be able to do that we can't do now? And maybe that's where the sort of the agility thing comes in, that we can do things faster. You won't have to wait 6 weeks. You can have it in 2 days, or a day, or half a day. So, yeah, definitely about the why.
If I could just make a comment, because when you were asking the question, you sort of talked about convincing the business that this is the way to go. If you speak to any of our salespeople in Oracle who sell our software as a service, they'll tell you they only ever speak to the business because that's who they sell HR to, that's who they sell financials to. So that's not an IT conversation for them. So it's an interesting concept that, we talked about this sort of slight cultural change in where we're heading with the cloud. So that's, I think, is one of them that, if it's a business outcome in a box, why are you going to talk to IT about it? It's done, it's built. So just a thought.
I think that's a good point, because that's been a real shift, isn't it, over the last few years, that before you would have talked to IT about it. And I think sometimes we in IT might struggle a little bit with the fact that they don't talk to IT about it. But that's not to say there's no role for IT, it's just that there's a different role for IT. Yep. And IT needs to be the enabler rather than the computer says no.
That's right.
type thing.
Of course, then the conversation about integration and all that kind of stuff. Well, okay, now you've bought that business, thanks very much. How am I going to integrate it with that over there? So, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because that does always come back
Yeah.
to, you know, well, yes, but you've got to make it talk to this.
Yeah.
So,
Awful.
I totally agree. It's all about the business value, and yeah, you should have those conversations with the business people. But we've waged a long campaign, and now a successful one, to get IT involved in these purchasing decisions right at the beginning. Because what's happened in the past is that systems have been bought that actually don't integrate, and then it's like, make it work. Well, we can't, and then we're the people that say no. It's like, if you'd come to us beforehand, you'd have bought something else, and we'd have been the people that said yes. So, you know, we put a lot of work into improving that relationship, and it has worked. But yeah, it's absolutely about being the people that say yes.
I mean, just one sort of point following on from that, and this has come up in other debates around the sort of, you know, the departmental IT. And I'm actually thinking about much more easier to use commodity resources, you know, the sort of research teams that are saying, well, IT has said no for whatever reason, I am going to go to AWS, I can provision myself 3 virtual machines, I can do it in 5 minutes on my credit card. How do we sort of deal with that side of things, that if we're not developing at the speed that our users want us, or the ease that our users want us to, they'll just go and do it anyway?
I mean, I can talk on, and I won't mention names, of some very big organisations who have fallen foul to this accidental architecture economy, which is that when you let people just go and do what they want to do on infrastructure, so let's just say a very famous a big retail brand did its e-commerce project exactly that way. So they had a lot of developers, each doing their own thing. They went away and built it. They did it on infrastructure only, and that was their approach. Just go and get some tin in the cloud, and off you go. A year down the line, it cost them $100 million to bring it all back on premise again, because they completely lost sight of the code. They didn't own it anymore. They couldn't. They found that in order to present it as a mobile application, e-commerce application, they couldn't do it. They had to rewrite code. It was just pain. So. Another example, a very famous broadcasting organisation, basically is a policy now: you cannot buy infrastructure on your credit card. If you buy it, you're out the door. Because of again, the same reason is that you find people treating this stuff as just commodity. You know, I can just get my corporate Amex out and off I go. And it's just causing headaches all the time for IT to just go and mop up the problem. So. For sure, and I've mentioned too that there's loads of examples why it's a bad idea just to let that happen.
Tony, Arthur, have you had this problem?
Well, researchers often treat a university as a franchise. I mean, a researcher is out there doing their own business, winning their own grants, and their allegiance to the university is, I mean, depending on who they are, can be quite tenuous. And quite often their allegiance is to their discipline or to their peers in other universities who they're collaborating with to deliver research. I always think putting a rule in their way isn't the way to do this. So you can't put, we can wheel out our CISO. We can rule out records management, and they can say things about barriers to doing those types of creative things. I mean, as I say that, there is something to think about data governance and what it is they're doing with data. And I certainly know lots of horror stories about researchers and what has happened to their data and the ramifications that's been. Partly what we're seeing just now is research collaborations actually coming up with their own standards as to how they actually run their IT. So if you look, probably the biggest one we've got is CERN, what they're doing with the LHC, and that's really well controlled in terms of how the computing works. We see research projects now that come to us and say, well, we have to have this bit of IT in terms of joining, so you have to provide me an IPv6 stack, because I'm not allowed to join this collaboration unless I'm part of, I've got those technologies. So without being a barrier to researchers doing what they have to do, I think there's certainly something to think about data, and then I guess there's a question to the providers internally, is are they agile and flexible enough to meet need?
Okay. Any more thoughts and comments? Yes, we've got a question there. Can you just wait for the mic, please? Thank you.
Can we expect to see research funding bodies directly dealing with cloud vendors, software as a service, to ensure that the researcher can go and do their thing in a controlled way with the right data protection in place? Does the university even need to be at all involved, let alone IT?
Arthur.
So JISC broker a deal with AWS that we're part of. They may broker with Azure, I don't know. They do, there we go. So, and that works quite well actually, so that just lets us do charge billing rather than people actually putting it on a credit card. And yeah, if people want to use AWS, if that works better for them, then that's fine. It's all about having those relationships so that, you know, as we were just saying, you don't want them putting the wrong data there, but if they can do something easier and quicker, then that's fine. Usually the limit is the smoking hole that the AWS charges make in your grant as you rack them up quite fast. So it's about knowing when it's appropriate to use it and when it's not. And we're trying to position ourselves as, you know, come to us and we'll tell you how to do it cost efficiently, rather than saying, don't do it.
We've got a question over there.
I'd just like to agree wholeheartedly with the last speaker. It's where I work, we have researchers that have spun up machines in the cloud on AWS, and they very quickly regret it because of the cost. So all IT need to do, as Arthur has said, is to demonstrate that they can provide the same service a lot cheaper and just provide a better service. If you can't provide a better service, you'll lose it. You'll lose it to the cloud, because what matters is the research, because that's the business case. And if we as professionals can't provide a better service than AWS or whoever, then we will lose that.
So we've been talking quite a bit about value, about benefits. We've talked about finance models. So I think this leads nicely into another question. And I'm going to ask Anna Matthews from our own UCISA, who has a question. Anna.
Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit, but when and how do you think software-defined networking becomes cost-effective on balance?
So I'm sort of mindful that the sorts of technologies we've been talking about are expensive at the moment, and there is perhaps a perception that, you know, the cloud is cheaper, but just picking up on the gentleman's comment before, you know, you can rack up these costs quite quickly. So when does software-defined automation, when does it become value for money? When does it become cost-effective?
So I think software-defined approaches, or approaches which are looking at automation and orchestration, they're cost-effective now. So there's a lot of the processes that we have in terms of building infrastructures that if you invest in taking that away from the manual process to automate it, and absolutely you deliver value now, you deliver cost savings now. Particularly to do with software-defined networking, it's not core my game, but certainly what I see of this just now is it's not standards-based enough now. It's very proprietary, the things you can do with software-defined networking, and they're absolutely coming at premium. So I think, in particular for software-defined networking, where do you start seeing it as a value proposition? I think that's when it stops being vendor-specific, when it actually starts to be standards-based and you can leverage market.
Okay. I mean, I'm conscious, just following on from that our Gartner presentation this morning in the opening keynote talked about sort of, you know, the vendor-independent approach. But we're not really there yet, are we? It is very, as you say, sort of vendor-specific and technology-specific.
I think there's some areas where it's starting to become vendor agnostic. So if you look at just the virtualization layers that we all do just now, you know, it doesn't matter what's underneath that what that x86 is just now. It doesn't matter if you're running an HP box or a Dell box or some white tin. I mean, it all kind of runs like that just now. The other place where I see it kind of mature enough is in storage virtualization layers. So quite often all they require is a LUN. And then you can have a lot of the smarts that used to be encased within very expensive controller heads requiring you to buy exactly the same disk from the same three vendors, but through a certain purchasing route, you tend to break that link. So I think there's certain places where you can see there's a software-defined approach that can help you, but very rarely do you see it completely end-to-end through product just now. as I say, a lot of this is just self-tooled.
Okay. Arthur?
I think the other thing is that when you start looking at the automation piece, certainly what you get is a compounding effect. So you get a benefit straight away from doing one thing, but then that lets you then do another thing quicker, and then you automate that, and then you can do a whole bunch of other things quicker, and you get rolling compound interest, sort of the opposite of technical debt.
Dave, value for money judgment, when you've told us already that Oracle are undercutting your competitors, when does it become really value for money, and particularly for HE rather than in a commercial environment?
Well, you know, you've got to do the sums, right? And we come back a little bit to the capex versus opex. You know, where do I want to spend? Out of what purse do I want to spend the money? So I'm going to disagree a little bit on it doesn't really matter what's under the hypervisor, because I think the better performance you get, you know, for example, if you can get twice the performance out of one processor in the cloud versus another, you need half as much. So I have to buy less. So I think if you can come down to that point where you can really understand not just the concept of, well, who can I buy a processor from in the cloud, a compute unit or some virtual networking or storage, but actually can I also look at the performance figures? Those two things have to go hand in hand. It's cost and performance. It's very difficult to do that, by the way, at the moment, because people don't publish that sort of stuff. Because if you look inside the leading infrastructure vendor data center, it's just a mixture of stuff. So you can't, there's no, you know, it could be a mixture of HP and Dell and so on. It's very easy for us to benchmark it because we make all our own hardware. So we can say, you know, categorically is X52 servers, X42 servers with this particular chip that performs at this certain standard and X number of gigahertz and so on. So we can do all that stuff. I think as time goes by, vendors are going to be forced to give you more of that information so that you can make more informed choices. But to be honest, to answer the question, I can't really answer the question now because you've got to do the sums yourself. You have to compare what does this look like for me on premise, what does it look like for me in this cloud, and basically test us as vendors. Ask, you know, what's it going to cost me? You know, I need this amount of storage, I need this amount of RAM, I need this amount of compute power. Ask us to quote you for it. We'll tell you. We'll map it out.
I'm curious now amongst our audience. I mean, how many of you think that today cloud, if we use that very generic term, is value for money, is cheaper than doing it in-house? Or let me ask you the reverse. Show of hands, how many of you believe that you can run services more cost effectively on-premise internally? Go on, put your hands up.
It depends on the workload. Everything depends so much on the workload. It's like high performance compute. You can go out and buy HPC in Amazon Cloud or whatever, and you get a decent, you know, whatever you If you've got on-site HPC and you can't keep it full something like 90% or plus of the time, it may well be more cost effective to just purchase that HPC as you require it in the cloud. We don't do enough workload analysis. We go out and buy a server and give it to somebody, or spin up a virtual machine and give it to some researcher, but we don't say, what's your workload? How are you going to be using this? What percentage of the time are you going to keep this busy? Now, obviously, they don't keep things busy very much, otherwise we wouldn't be getting 100 to 1 server to server, VMs onto servers, because it wouldn't work.
So, I mean, I think this is a good point, and it takes me back to another slide we saw this afternoon, which was talking about metering and then, I can't remember the middle one, and then recharging. And as a general point, I don't think in the sector we are very good at metering. We don't know what we are actually doing. Is that a fair comment? Nobs, any further comments on the more general point? Is cloud value for money? Yeah, we've got a question at the back there.
We gave a talk earlier about our recent storage acquisition, and we obviously sized that and we spec the IOPS it must deliver, and you know, we forced the vendor to deliver that. We were able to do performance testing, so we know that system delivers a certain capacity to a certain performance, and we've paid for that up front for the next 5 years, so we've got it. Are cloud providers able to give that guarantee?
Arthur.
So I read something interestingly. So Netflix, as you may know, are a massive user of AWS. They published something recently that shows they're getting something, I think it was something like a factor of 8 variation for a certain class, so M3.x large or whatever it was, within that certain class of performance. So they're actually benchmarking them themselves. They spin up a VM, they'll benchmark it, and they'll kill it if it's slow, because you get this problem of noisy neighbours and all this sort of thing. So I don't see how a cloud provider can easily give you that guarantee unless you're buying an entire set of servers, which is a service that some people offer. You have a guaranteed set of hardware and then you run over the top of that. But otherwise, how do you guarantee the performance if Edinburgh next to me are running their HPC job against my little web API? You can't do it. So it's benchmark and measure, I think. And that's going to be very tricky.
So that's very true. So vendors do have different options like dedicated compute, so you don't have noisy neighbours. You can also have a dedicated line into the data centre, so you have your own connection either via MPLS or via, like us, we have a solution for that. One of the questions you can ask a cloud vendor there's another question you can ask: do you oversubscribe? Okay, so like when you book a flight, if there's 150 seats on the plane, sometime that airline will sell 180 seats, banking that 30 people don't turn up. That's how a lot of cloud vendors also work. They oversubscribe their compute. And so you buy 2 CPUs, 2 vCPUs, whatever you buy, but you haven't necessarily reserved those 2 processors. You're competing still for those processors. So you can ask the vendor, if I buy those CPUs from you, am I getting those? Are you guaranteeing me I'm getting those CPUs? So you might, that's not necessarily in a dedicated, it's still in multi-tenant. Some vendors will actually say, yes, they are your CPUs, you will get those, and that gives you much more predictable performance.
Tony?
Do cloud providers guarantee performance? I guess I'll say I'll echo a little bit of what Arthur was saying. We did some, or rather some of our researchers did for us, we didn't do it, some tests of the network performance that we're getting. So in the same way as they did the CPU, they were just looking to see how the upload and download speeds were working for certain things. And again, they were just seeing really, significant variations in what they were seeing. Now, we don't have a dedicated line in. It was using shared networking. So the general cloud infrastructure services I see just now don't tend to give that kind of quality of service guarantees. I think a lot of what we're looking at for the future, we seem to be thinking very much just now about cloud rather than thinking about software defined just now. But for that cloud piece, again thinking about infrastructure, I think into the future it's probably less about buying infrastructure in the cloud and more about buying service to platform in the cloud. And the automation piece really plays into that in terms of even how you on-premise orchestrate how things are happening out there.
Okay. I'm conscious we had another question from somewhere in the middle. Is there still a question? No. So we're getting towards the end. I thought for our last question for the panel, this is a question that came through on Twitter, actually, and I think it's a good one to end on. If we think that we've been talking about software-defined, and we've, over the years, virtualized first the server, the network, now we're talking about this software layer. Can we take abstraction too far? Our final question.
Right. So we used to have the comedy of how many protocols you could stack on top of each other. It's basically the Christmas dinner quiz is that, who's got the highest protocol stack here? Can you abstract too much? Is that the question?
Well, I suppose the question is where will this end? And just to play devil's advocate here, I mean, if you start thinking about artificial intelligence and you start overlaying Cortana or Siri or anything else for that matter, are we almost getting to that stage where everything is self-provisioning? How far can we go?
Well, we're certainly nowhere near far enough yet, so we're very, very early on this journey. How far can it go? Arthur will answer.
Gosh, we're totally nowhere near there. So if you look at things like the functions as a service stuff, the AWS Lambda, Azure functions, that's pretty abstract in that you no longer care what it runs on. You just say, here's a bit of JavaScript, it gets data from here, it does something and it sends it over there. That's quite abstract. But there's a whole history of, going back to like the 4th generation languages that they were called, which were designed to let non-programmers program. And they all failed because it turns out that designing a business process, even if you're not writing code in the writing code sense, you'll still have to think like a programmer. And so I think the abstraction will still end up needing that logical mind. And how far can you abstract it? Well, I think if we start using category theory to write our data analysis, then we've probably gone a little bit too far, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So, if you can get Excel to do everything in the cloud, then the world runs on Excel, you know.
Nikki, do you want to bring us back down to ground, just to finish off with?
I'd like to think that there will always be a need for some kind of human interaction. Might look completely different from what we do, but I would be horrified to be in a world where everything was automated, done by computers, and humans just weren't a part of that anymore. I think that's, for me, that's quite a scary picture. So I hope that there will always be a need for humans to drive the computers, or to work with the computers.
Okay, and I think that's actually a very good point to draw this to a close. And I'm very conscious that I'm standing between you and checking in and subsequently the bar. So with that, please will you thank our panellists, Arthur, Tony, Dave and Nikki. And you should give yourselves a round of applause as well. Thank you very much for your questions and contributions. And that draws infrastructure question time for a close. Thank you.